My name is Lila, and I'm 58 years old. I remember the sterile chill of the hospital room, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the way my doctor avoided my eyes when he said the word terminal. 6 months, maybe less, depending on how my body responded. He said it gently, but there's no gentle way to tell someone their time is ending. For a few moments, I didn't speak. I stared at the little digital clock on the wall, watching seconds disappear, thinking so that's how quickly life slips away. You see, I've lived most of my life trying to make sure my daughter Sophie never had to struggle the way I did. I worked every job I could find when her father left us. I scrubbed floors, balanced ledgers, sold houses, then one day opened my own real estate business. It wasn't luck, it was blood, sweat, and years of sacrifice. By the time I turned 50, I was comfortable. I had a home, a reputation, and more money than I'd ever imagined as that poor single mother 2 decades ago. But what's the point of building an empire if, in the end, you stand in a hospital room alone? I'd always thought Sophie and I were close, but as she got older, something changed. The calls became shorter. The visits, rarer. Our conversations turned from laughter and memories to transactions and obligations. Whenever the phone rang, I already knew the tone in her voice: polite, rehearsed, distant. And at the end of almost every call, there was always the same question. Can you transfer some money, Mom? At first, I didn't mind. I told myself she was just stressed, busy, trying to make a life for herself. But as time went on, I started to see it for what it really was. Sophie didn't want me. She wanted what I had. I remember one afternoon when I tried to tell her about my diagnosis. I had been sitting in my favorite armchair, holding the phone tightly, trying to steady my voice. I told her, "Sweetheart, I'm not doing too well. The doctors found something." There was a pause. Then she sighed and said, "Oh, Mom, I'm sorry. But listen, Derek and I are trying to get a new place. We're short on the down payment. Do you think you could help?" That was the moment something inside me cracked quietly, like glass under a pillow. After I hung up, I cried harder than I ever had in my life. Not because of the cancer, but because I finally understood how invisible I'd become to my own child. I spent the next few days staring at old photo albums: Sophie as a baby, her first day of school, the messy pigtails, the way she used to cling to me when thunderstorms scared her. I remembered the little girl who once said, "Mommy, I'll take care of you when you're old." I used to believe her. But people change. Love fades when it's not watered. It was during one of my sleepless nights, staring out my bedroom window, that a thought began to grow, something quiet but powerful. If my time is running out, I told myself, then I get to decide how the story ends. I started thinking about my will, about what I'd leave behind, and who truly deserved it. For years, I assumed Sophie would inherit everything: the business, the house, the savings. But what had she ever given me except disappointment and distance? I wanted my final act on this earth to mean something, not another transaction, something deeper, something that would actually matter. That night, I took out a notebook and began writing. I wrote about my childhood, my marriage, my struggles, and every moment of betrayal that shaped me. I poured every memory into those pages, as if documenting my life might somehow give it meaning again. By morning, my decision was clear. I would leave behind not just money, but a message, one that would force Sophie to face the truth about who she'd become. Still, a small part of me hoped she might change. I tried calling her again that week. She answered after the third ring, laughing with someone in the background. When I told her I missed her, she said, "Mom, you're being dramatic. I'll come by next month, okay?" But next month never came. Instead, I began seeing the faces of nurses and strangers more than my own family. It was lonely, yes, but that loneliness turned into clarity. I realized the only power I had left was in what I would leave behind. I started planning quietly, meticulously, what I would do with the life I'd built. I didn't tell anyone, not even my lawyer at first. I wanted time to think, to be sure. In those moments between the pain and the treatments, I began to feel something unexpected. Freedom. When death stares you in the face, you stop caring about what people think. You stop pretending. I decided that my last months on Earth would not be about regret. They would be about justice. Not revenge in the cruel sense, but truth, the kind that cuts deep and heals slowly. And so I began my plan. A plan that would make sure Sophie finally understood the difference between love and greed. I closed my notebook that night, placed it beside my bed, and whispered to the darkness, "You'll see one day, Sophie. You'll see what you truly meant to me." She thought she'd get everything, but I had already chosen someone else. It started on an ordinary Tuesday when I met Maya, a stranger with nothing to her name. It was a gray morning in late October when I met Maya, the woman who would quietly turn my final months into something meaningful. I remember the hospital smelling faintly of antiseptic and rain. The nurses were moving briskly, their shoes squeaking on the polished floor, and I was sitting by the window waiting for my next chemotherapy session. The world outside was blurred, the trees stripped of color, much like my own reflection in the glass. I had stopped wearing makeup weeks ago. What was the point? I had lost weight, my hair was thinning, and my skin had turned pale as paper. The only thing that remained sharp was my memory, painfully sharp. That's when I noticed her. A young woman sitting on the bench across from the waiting area, hugging a plastic folder to her chest. Her clothes were simple, a faded denim jacket, dark jeans, and sneakers that looked like they'd walked 1,000 miles. She looked tired, not just physically but emotionally, the kind of exhaustion that life carves deep into you. When she looked up, our eyes met for a moment. She smiled, small and hesitant, and I nodded politely. A few minutes later, one of the nurses came out and called, "Next." Maya stood. And that's when I realized she wasn't a patient. She was pushing a wheelchair for a frail young man who looked barely 20. He was coughing softly, his hands trembling as she guided him toward the consultation room. Something about the tenderness in the way she adjusted his blanket struck me. There was no impatience, no complaint, just quiet love. After my session, I saw her again in the hospital cafeteria. She was sitting alone at a corner table, eating a sandwich she'd probably packed herself. The boy wasn't with her this time. I don't know what made me walk over. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was loneliness, or maybe I just wanted to remember what kindness looked like again. "Mind if I sit here?" I asked, carrying my tray. She looked up, surprised. "Oh, sure," she said quickly, moving her things aside. "Please." Her voice was soft but steady. There was warmth in it, the kind that comes from someone who's had to grow up too soon. I introduced myself, and she did the same. "I'm Maya," she said. "My brother Noah is a patient here. He has a rare heart condition." I nodded slowly. "You seem young to carry so much weight." She smiled sadly. "Sometimes life doesn't ask if you're ready, it just gives you what it wants to." We talked for nearly an hour. She told me how her parents had died in a car crash 5 years earlier, leaving her and her younger brother alone. She worked as a caretaker at a nursing home, then as a cleaner in the evenings, anything to pay for Noah's treatments. When I asked her how she managed, she shrugged lightly. "I just do. He's all I have." That line stayed with me long after I went home. He's all I have. It made me think about Sophie, my daughter, who had everything. And yet somehow, nothing. She had money, friends, a fiancé, and the kind of life I once dreamed she'd live. But she didn't have compassion. She didn't have warmth. I began seeing Maya more often at the hospital. Sometimes we'd share tea or talk in the courtyard between treatments. She never complained about her struggles. She spoke with quiet strength, as though endurance was her second language. One day, I noticed she was distracted. Her eyes were red, and her hands trembled when she reached for her cup. I asked her what was wrong. "They're increasing Noah's medication," she said, barely above a whisper. "It's working, but it's expensive. I don't know how we'll keep up." I could see the fear behind her calmness. That same fear I'd seen in myself when I was younger, when I didn't know how I'd feed my daughter after her father left. That night, I went home and stared at my bank account for a long time. Numbers, just numbers. All the years of saving, working, and fighting reduced to digital figures on a screen. What good was it doing me now? I couldn't take it with me, so I made a quiet decision. The next morning, I visited the hospital billing office and anonymously paid the remaining balance on Noah's treatment. It wasn't about charity. It was about gratitude. Somehow, Maya's presence, her kindness, had begun to thaw the bitterness I'd been carrying. A week later, I saw her again. She ran up to me in the hallway, tears streaming down her face. Someone paid Noah's hospital bill. She said breathlessly. I don't know who, but it must have been a mistake. I smiled faintly. Maybe it wasn't. She shook her head. No, you don't understand. That's thousands of dollars. I can't accept something like that from anyone. I looked into her eyes and said, then don't think of it as a gift. Think of it as a reminder that good people still exist. She covered her mouth and began to cry again, soft, trembling sobs that made my own throat ache. When she finally calmed down, she whispered, whoever did this saved my brother's life. I wanted to tell her it was me, but something held me back. Maybe I didn't want her gratitude. Maybe I just wanted to watch goodness exist without conditions. Over the next few weeks, our friendship deepened. She would bring me small things, her brother's drawings, little snacks, or just company when I couldn't sleep. I began to think of her as the daughter I'd once hoped for, the one who didn't measure love in currency. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I imagined a different world. One where Maya was my daughter, and Sophie was just a memory. I hated myself for thinking that, but it felt true. One afternoon, as we sat under the hospital garden tree, Maya said something that pierced my heart. You remind me of my mother, she said quietly. You even scold me the same way. I laughed weakly. And was she as stubborn as I am? Worse. She smiled. But she never gave up on us. I turned my head, hiding the tears forming in my eyes. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I replayed her words again and again. She never gave up on us, and I realized I had given up on Sophie. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped believing she could change, but maybe this was life's way of reminding me that love can come from unexpected places. From that moment, Maya became a quiet part of my family, even if she didn't know it yet, because deep inside, I had already made my decision. When my time came, I wouldn't leave my legacy to blood that had turned cold. I would leave it to the one who had shown me what compassion truly meant. Little did she know, this bond would rewrite my final will. When your own child treats you like a bank account, the pain cuts deeper than any disease. By the time winter rolled in, my body was beginning to betray me. The treatments left me weak, nauseous, and often too exhausted to even get out of bed. My hands trembled when I tried to pour coffee, and my reflection in the mirror barely resembled the woman I'd once been. But even through the fog of pain and medication, one truth remained sharp. Sophie was still nowhere to be found. I'd left her dozens of messages over the months. Sometimes simple things like, just checking in, sweetheart, or would love to see you this weekend. Other times I was more honest. I miss you, Sophie. Please come by. Days would go by before she'd reply, usually with a short text. Been busy. Maybe next week. When she finally did visit, it was as if she couldn't get out fast enough. I'd try to tell her about my treatment, but she'd cut me off to talk about Derek, her fiancé, and their wedding plans. She'd show me photos of dresses, venues, or a new car they were thinking of buying. It was always about appearances, never about feelings. Once, she came over wearing a designer coat that probably cost more than my monthly medication. She hugged me a quick, polite embrace and immediately started scanning the living room. Mom, you really should hire someone to redecorate, she said. This place looks so outdated. If you ever decide to sell, Derek knows a realtor who could get you a great deal. I forced a smile, though I could barely hide the sting. I like it the way it is, I said softly. Every corner here has a memory. She shrugged. Uninterested. Memories don't sell houses. Her words hung in the air like frost. I tried to talk about Maya once, thinking maybe Sophie would appreciate the story of kindness and humanity. But she rolled her eyes. "Mom, you need to stop trusting random people. You always do this, you let sob stories pull you in. For all you know, she could be taking advantage of you." I remember my blood turning cold. "Not everyone's out for what they can get, Sophie." She laughed lightly, sipping her expensive latte. "You're too soft. That's your problem." I wanted to tell her that softness was what had built our life, the long nights, the sacrifices, the hope that love could conquer exhaustion. But I stayed silent. I'd learned that my words no longer reached her. After she left that evening, I sat in the quiet house and realized something painful. I felt lonelier after her visits than before. Weeks passed. My strength continued to fade, but Maya's presence grew steadier. She visited me regularly, even bringing her brother Noah sometimes. They'd sit with me, help me around the house, and listen when I needed to talk. Maya would cook simple meals, warm soups, soft bread, and sometimes we'd just sit in silence, watching the sunset through the window. She treated me like family without expecting anything in return. Sophie, on the other hand, began to treat me like a chore, something to check off her list. One weekend, she called saying she and Derek were in the neighborhood and might stop by. I waited all day. When she finally showed up, she was on her phone the entire time. Derek didn't even greet me properly. He walked straight to my liquor cabinet, helping himself as if it already belonged to him. "Nice collection," he said, grinning. "Guess we'll inherit some good taste too, huh?" I felt my stomach twist. Sophie didn't even flinch. She laughed and said, "Derek, don't be rude," but she didn't mean it. When they left that night, I sat on the couch long after the door closed. The silence in the room felt heavy, heavier than the pain in my chest. I started keeping a small journal, not about my illness but about my emotions. Each entry began with a simple question. If I died today, who would truly miss me? At first, the answer was obvious. Sophie. Of course. She was my daughter. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't sure anymore. Would she cry because she'd lost her mother, or because she'd lost her inheritance? That thought haunted me. It followed me through every sleepless night and every quiet morning when the world outside seemed to move on without me. Then, one day, I overheard something that shattered whatever illusions I had left. Sophie and Derek had come by unexpectedly. I was resting in my bedroom when I heard them talking in the kitchen. They didn't know I was awake. "She can't have much time left," Derek said casually. "You should make sure the will's in order." "I know," Sophie replied. "But Mom's been acting weird lately. I think she's hiding something. Maybe she changed it." My breath caught in my throat. Derek chuckled. "Then you better fix that before it's too late." Sophie sighed. "Don't worry. I'll handle it." Handle it. Those two words burned themselves into my mind. They weren't talking about love or loss, they were talking about control, about money. When they left that evening, I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the empty teacups they'd left behind. My hands trembled, not from illness this time, but from realization. I had spent my life giving everything I owned, everything I was, and in return, my daughter had grown into someone who saw me as an obstacle between her and a payday. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would never let greed poison my memory. The next morning, I called my lawyer Carla and told her I needed to discuss my estate privately and urgently. When she arrived a few days later, I explained everything. She listened quietly, her eyes sympathetic but professional. When I told her I wanted to change my will, she hesitated. "Lila," she said gently, "are you sure about this? Your daughter might not take it well." I smiled faintly. "Carla, I'm dying. The least I can do before I go is tell the truth." She nodded slowly. "Then let's begin." We sat at my dining table for hours, going through every detail, every property, every asset, every account. As I signed the papers, I felt something inside me shift, a mixture of sorrow and relief. For the first time in years, I felt in control. I looked out the window at the fading light. remembering the sound of Sophie's laughter when she was little, the way she used to run into my arms after school. Somewhere along the way, life had hardened her, and I'd let it happen. Maybe this wasn't punishment, maybe it was the only way to teach her the lesson I'd failed to give in life. When Carla packed up her briefcase and left, I stood in the empty house, the silence pressing against me like a heartbeat. I whispered to myself, if Sophie wanted my money more than my love, she was about to get neither. If she only knew the will I'd just signed, her world would soon crumble. I sat with my lawyer, and for the first time, I felt completely at peace with my decision. The next morning, the house felt different, quiet, but not empty. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of purpose. I had something to do, something that mattered. Carla arrived again, carrying a leather folder and her usual calm smile. She'd been my lawyer for years. Through the growth of my business and every property purchase, she'd seen me as the ambitious woman who had built everything from scratch. Now she was seeing me as a woman preparing to say goodbye. She spread the documents across the dining table, the same place where Sophie had once eaten breakfast before school. That thought stung, but I pushed it away. Are you sure you want to go through with this? She asked gently. I've never been more sure of anything, I said. My voice surprised me, steady, clear, no hesitation. Carla nodded and clicked her pen open. All right then. Let's make your wishes official. We began the long, methodical process of reviewing my estate, every property, every account, every asset I had worked decades to earn. As we went through the numbers, I could almost hear Sophie's voice in the back of my mind, talking about which house she'd sell first, or which jewelry piece she'd keep. But this time, those thoughts didn't make me angry. They made me certain. When Carla reached the section about beneficiaries, I took a deep breath. I'd like to divide my assets, I said, but not the way you might expect. She looked up from her notes. Go on. I want 80% of my estate, that includes properties, savings, and business shares, to go to a young woman named Maya Rivera and her brother Noah. Carla blinked. And who are they exactly? A friend, I said softly. Someone who reminded me what kindness looks like when you have nothing to gain. Carla hesitated. And the remaining 20%? That will go into a trust for my daughter, Sophie, but she can't touch it, not yet. Carla raised an eyebrow. You want to restrict access? Yes, I said firmly. The trust will remain sealed for 5 years after my passing. It will only release if Sophie completes verified work in a registered charitable organization, something that benefits others, not herself. If she fails to do so, the funds revert to the charity foundation in my name. Carla stared at me for a long moment. You realize this could cause tension? I smiled faintly. It's not tension, Carla. It's accountability. I want her to learn that money means nothing if you don't earn it with heart. She nodded slowly, her pen scratching softly across the paper. As she wrote, I felt something loosen inside me. For years, I had lived under the weight of guilt for not being enough, for letting Sophie drift away, for believing money could bridge the gap between us. But this decision felt right. It wasn't revenge. It was a message. A mother's final lesson, written in ink. When the drafts were complete, Carla slid the final document toward me. Read it carefully, Lila. Once you sign, it's done. I took my time. Each line, each paragraph, was a piece of my life being redistributed, redefined. When I reached the end, I paused. I'd also like to include a personal letter, I said quietly. One for Sophie, to be opened only after my death. Carla looked up, her expression softening. Of course. You can dictate it now if you'd like, and I'll make sure it's sealed. But I shook my head. No, I'll write it myself. It needs to come from me, not as a client, not as a businesswoman, but as her mother. She nodded. Understood. After I signed the last page, Carla placed her hand gently on mine. Lila, she said, her voice trembling just slightly. I've had clients who've built empires, and I've had clients who've lost everything. But I've never seen someone face death with this much grace. Her words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I hadn't felt graceful. I'd felt broken, angry, tired. But maybe grace was exactly that, doing the right thing even when your heart aches. After she left, I sat in the stillness of my home. The afternoon light spilled across the table, illuminating the stack of signed documents, proof that I'd taken control of my final chapter. That evening, I began writing the letter. My hand shook as I formed the first words. My dearest Sophie, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I hope this letter finds you not in anger but in reflection. I want you to understand that love cannot be inherited, only earned. The words flowed from somewhere deep inside me, years of silence turned into ink. I wrote about the little girl who once made me laugh until I cried. About the pride I felt when she graduated, and the sorrow I felt when she drifted away. I told her I forgave her long ago, even when she didn't ask for it, but I also told her the truth that I couldn't reward indifference with wealth. That my legacy needed to go where it could heal, not where it would rot in resentment. By the time I finished, tears had blurred the paper. I sealed the letter, pressed my trembling lips against the envelope, and handed it to Carla the next day. This stays locked until the will is read, I told her. She nodded. I'll make sure of it. As the weeks went by, my health declined further, but I felt lighter. I spent my days with Maya and Noah, enjoying small, precious moments, laughter, tea, music. I never told Maya what I'd done. To her, I was just a friend, a woman she visited out of kindness. Once, she noticed the folder of legal papers on my table and asked, "Are you planning something?" I smiled. Just making peace with my past. She nodded, not pressing further. That was the beauty of Maya, she never asked for more than I was willing to give. In the quiet moments between sleep and waking, I thought about Sophie. Despite everything, I still loved her. That kind of love doesn't die, it just transforms like light bending through glass. I prayed that one day she'd understand, that the choices I'd made weren't out of spite but love. A strange calm began to settle over me. Even as my body weakened, my mind felt stronger than it had in years. I had finally rewritten the story of my life, one that wouldn't end in bitterness, but in truth. The last time I saw Carla, she handed me a final copy of the will, neatly sealed and notarized. "Everything's official now," she said. "Maya and her brother will be notified when the time comes." I took the envelope and smiled faintly. "Good. That's exactly how I want it." She hesitated before leaving. "You're sure you don't want to tell Sophie?" I looked out the window, where the winter sun cast long, golden streaks across the snow. "No," I said softly. "She'll find out when she needs to, not a moment sooner." As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange peace settle over me, not joy, not sorrow, but something in between. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and whispered into the fading light, "It's done." And when that day came, nothing would ever be the same again. Knowing you're dying frees you, it strips away everything fake. By the time I entered the final month of my life, something inside me had shifted. I no longer counted time in days or weeks. I measured it in small, fleeting moments, the sound of birds outside my window, the warmth of tea between my palms, the laughter of Maya's brother echoing down the hall. I knew my body was giving up, but for the first time in years, my heart wasn't heavy. Each morning, I woke with a strange serenity. The pain was constant, a dull ache that never fully left, but I'd learned to make peace with it. Pain meant I was still here, still breathing, still capable of feeling something. And that, in its own way, was beautiful. Maya had become my steady companion. She'd stopped calling me Mrs. Lila, and started calling me just Lila. The first time she did it, she blushed, apologizing immediately, but I only laughed. "It's perfect," I told her. "Titles don't matter where I'm going." She began visiting almost every day after work, bringing little things she thought I'd like: a flower from her walk, homemade soup, a book of poems she'd found at a thrift store. She and Noah would stay for hours, helping me around the house or simply keeping me company. Sometimes, I'd wake up from a nap to find her reading quietly beside my bed. In those moments, I'd watch her and think how strange life could be, that a stranger had filled a space my own daughter had left empty. I'd tried calling Sophie several times during those weeks, Most calls went unanswered. When she did pick up, it was always rushed. She'd say she was planning to visit soon, but the visits never happened. Once, she told me she and Derek were too busy closing a big deal. Another time, she said she was exhausted and needed a break. A break from what, I wondered? From living, from caring, from remembering she had a mother who was dying? I'd hang up, look at the phone for a long time, and whisper to myself, "It's all right, Lila. You did your best." But some nights, the ache of missing her was unbearable. I'd stare at the framed photo of Sophie as a little girl, her missing front tooth, the tiny dimple in her cheek, and I'd cry quietly into my pillow. She'd once been my reason to live. Now she was the lesson I had to learn before dying. One afternoon, Maya found me sitting outside on the porch, watching the sunset. My blanket had slipped from my shoulders, and I was trembling slightly from the cold. She wrapped it back around me and said softly, "You shouldn't be out here alone." "I like the cold," I told her. "It reminds me I can still feel something." She smiled sadly and sat beside me. "You've taught me a lot, you know." I turned my head, surprised. "Me?" "Yes, you've taught me that even when life hurts, there's still room for kindness." Her words hit deeper than she knew. I looked out at the sky streaks of orange and pink fading into indigo and whispered, "Kindness is wealth too, Maya, the kind you never lose." She reached out and squeezed my hand. That small gesture carried more love than I'd felt in years. A few days later, I began recording voice messages. My lawyer, Carla, had suggested it a way to leave behind a personal touch. But instead of legal messages, I recorded something different. I spoke to Sophie. I told her about my memories, about the smell of rain on the day she was born, about how terrified I was the first time she got sick as a baby. I spoke of the little things I remembered: her favorite bedtime story, her first bike ride, her laughter echoing through our old apartment. Even though she might never listen, I wanted my voice to live somewhere beyond me, to remind her that once, she was deeply loved. As my condition worsened, Maya insisted on staying overnight. She brought a cot into my bedroom and kept a small lamp burning through the night. I'd wake sometimes to see her sitting cross-legged on the floor, reading or sketching. The quiet presence of another human being was the most comforting sound I knew. One night, I woke from a dream, or maybe it was a memory. I saw myself holding Sophie as a child, spinning her around in the kitchen, both of us laughing until we fell. The sound of her joy was so vivid that for a moment, I thought she was there. When I opened my eyes and realized it was just Maya sleeping in the chair beside me, tears spilled silently down my cheeks. The next morning, I told Carla I wanted to make one more addition to my estate: a scholarship fund in Sophie's name. Not for her, but for single mothers raising daughters alone. "I want it to carry her name," I said. "Maybe it'll remind her what love used to look like." Carla smiled, her eyes soft. "You have a good heart, Lila." "I'm trying to leave the world a little softer than I found it," I replied. As the end drew nearer, I began feeling a strange pull. Not fear, but anticipation. It's hard to explain, but death stopped feeling like an ending. It felt like a release. Every breath grew shallower, every step slower. But inside me, something was blooming. Forgiveness, perhaps. On my final evening, the air was quiet and golden. Maya had lit a few candles in the living room and was humming a tune I didn't recognize. I asked her to sit beside me. "Promise me something," I whispered. She leaned closer. "Anything. When I'm gone, don't carry guilt. Don't feel like you owe me. Just live well. That'll be enough." She started crying. "You don't get to say things like that," she said, half laughing through tears. "You're not going anywhere yet." I smiled faintly. "Maya, I've been going somewhere since the day I was born. I'm just closer to the station now." She held my hand, and we sat there in silence until I drifted into sleep. Later that night, I woke again. Everything around me felt hazy, soft. I could hear faint voices, but they sounded far away. My chest felt heavy, but my mind was calm. I whispered, "Carla," knowing she'd kept her promise. When she arrived the next morning and saw me fading, she knelt beside me, whispering that everything was prepared. The will, the letter, the recordings. I managed a small smile. Good, I breathed. Then I can rest. My last memory is of the sunlight streaming through the curtains, catching the tears on Maya's cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you, Lila, for everything." I wanted to tell her that she'd given me more than she realized, a reason to believe in goodness again. I closed my eyes, my final thought drifting toward Sophie. My little girl, my greatest joy and my deepest wound. I hoped that someday she'd find the woman she was meant to be, not the one shaped by greed or appearances, but by the heart I once saw in her as a child. As my breathing slowed, I felt no fear, only peace. When they cry at my funeral, the truth will finally come out. It's strange to imagine people crying over you when you can't feel it. If the soul lingers for a while after the body fades, then I was there, hovering somewhere between memory and silence, watching the day they buried me. The morning began gray, heavy clouds pressing low against the earth, as though the sky itself felt the weight of my leaving. I had always imagined my funeral would be small and quiet, but Sophie had other ideas. She arranged everything herself, or at least, that's what she told people. In truth, I could see the professionals she'd hired doing most of the work. The service was lavish, too lavish. Rows of white roses, a marble casket, polished cars lined up neatly in the driveway of the chapel. Everything sparkled, everything smelled expensive, but what it lacked was sincerity. Sophie arrived last, wearing a designer black dress and oversized sunglasses that hid her eyes. Her fiancé, Derek, walked beside her, adjusting his tie as if attending a corporate event. She didn't carry flowers. She carried presents calculated, poised. The perfect picture of a grieving daughter. I watched her step forward, head held high, greeting guests with a delicate sadness that looked almost rehearsed. She thanked people for coming, accepted condolences with a nod, and posed graciously for the attention that hovered around her. It wasn't cruelty. It was emptiness. My daughter had forgotten how to mourn. The crowd inside the chapel filled quickly: colleagues, distant relatives, a few old friends from the real estate business. I even recognized a couple of clients I hadn't spoken to in years. They whispered about how strong Sophie was, how beautiful the service looked. No one mentioned who I really was. No one talked about the woman who had stayed up nights, balancing bills, or walked to work in the snow when we couldn't afford gas. And then, quietly, at the back of the room, came Maya. She wore a simple gray dress, her dark hair pulled back, her eyes swollen from crying. She didn't come with anyone. She carried a single white rose, its stem wrapped in ribbon. Others filled the air with polite murmurs and shallow tears. She stood still, head bowed, lips trembling. I watched her from wherever I was, feeling something like warmth again. When the minister began to speak, his voice echoed softly through the chapel. Lila Thompson was a woman of perseverance, compassion, and strength, he said. She built her life from the ground up, and she touched many lives in ways we may never fully know. Sophie's shoulders stiffened slightly at those words. Perhaps she sensed that part of my story belonged to someone she didn't know, someone like Maya. When the minister invited Sophie to speak, she stood, pulling off her sunglasses. Her eyes were dry. "Thank you all for coming," she began. Her voice was smooth, practiced. "My mother was a remarkable woman. Ambitious, hardworking, and, very loving." She hesitated, glancing briefly toward Derek. "She always wanted the best for everyone around her. I hope she's finally at peace." The crowd nodded approvingly. And when she sat back down, several people whispered how poised she was. But all I could think was how little she'd said. Her words floated in the air, light and empty, like perfume that fades too soon. Then, to my surprise, Maya stood up. She didn't walk to the front. She just spoke softly from where she was. "I didn't know Lila for long," she said, her voice trembling. "But she changed my life. She taught me that kindness can come from the most unexpected places. I'll never forget her. Her words were simple, but they hit like thunder. A few people turned to look at her, confused, curious, wondering who this young woman was and what she had to do with me. Sophie's eyes narrowed slightly. She whispered something to Derek, who shrugged. After the service, people gathered outside under umbrellas. Sophie mingled with the guests, shaking hands, thanking everyone for coming. Some offered donations to the foundation, which she hadn't even set up yet but pretended already existed. She smiled graciously, accepting envelopes, posing for photos beside the casket. Meanwhile, Maya stood at a distance, silent, holding her rose. When the crowd began to disperse, she stepped forward and laid the flower gently on my coffin. "Thank you, Lila," she whispered, her voice breaking. "For everything you did and everything you didn't have to. If souls could cry, mine did." Carla, my lawyer, stood a few feet away, observing the scene with quiet composure. She was holding a briefcase, the one containing the sealed envelope and the will. I could see her eyes move between Sophie and Maya, thoughtful, knowing what the next day would bring. When Sophie noticed her, she approached quickly. "Carla," she said in a low voice, "I assume we'll be meeting soon? To, handle everything?" Carla nodded calmly. "Tomorrow morning, my office, 10 o'clock. "Good," Sophie said, adjusting her hair. "I just want this all wrapped up. Mom would have wanted things taken care of quickly." Carla's expression didn't change, but I could almost hear her thoughts. "No, Sophie. That's not what your mother wanted at all." As the hearse began to move, the crowd followed it toward the cemetery. The sound of rain began softly, turning the ground slick beneath their shoes. Umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers, and the air filled with whispers. Sophie walked behind my casket, Derek beside her, holding her arm for the cameras that had come local business acquaintances who wanted to be seen showing respect. I watched her from above the gray clouds of memory and wondered if she felt anything real at all. When the casket was lowered into the ground, Maya lingered after everyone else had gone. She knelt by the fresh soil, her hands trembling, and whispered a prayer. Then she pulled a small piece of folded paper from her pocket and tucked it into the earth. I wanted so desperately to know what it said. Carla stayed a moment too, standing quietly at the edge of the grave. She spoke softly, not to Sophie, not to Maya, but to me. "It's all ready, Lila," she murmured. "Tomorrow, they'll both know the truth." And then she walked away. When everyone was gone, the rain grew heavier, blurring the world into streaks of silver. My tombstone gleamed faintly in the dim light, engraved with simple words I had chosen myself long ago. She gave more than she received, and she found peace in giving. It wasn't true of how I lived, not always, but it was true of how I wanted to leave. As I drifted from that scene, I felt a strange calm. Maybe that's what death is, not darkness but understanding. I realized that love and regret are the same thing when time runs out. I thought of Sophie one last time, my beautiful, selfish, lost child. Somewhere, deep down, I still hoped she'd find herself in the wreckage of what came next. Because the real storm hadn't begun yet. Tomorrow, Carla would read my will. And when Sophie learned who I'd left everything to, the facade she'd built so carefully would finally crumble. Sophie's expression changed when she realized Maya's name was on the list. The air was thick with expectation and greed. If the soul truly lingers near the living, then I was there that morning unseen, watching as my lawyer Carla prepared the room for the reading of my will. Her office was neat, elegant, filled with soft light from tall windows. She'd placed tissues on the coffee table and a tray of tea that no one would touch. She knew what was coming. She knew how deeply this day would cut. Sophie arrived first. She swept into the room wearing another black outfit, chic, expensive, perfectly pressed. Her face was composed, though her eyes darted toward Carla's desk almost immediately. "Thank you for seeing me so soon," she said briskly. "I just want to get everything settled quickly. My mother wouldn't have wanted things to drag on." Carla offered a polite smile. "Of course. Please. Have a seat." Behind Sophie came Derek, as smug as ever, pretending to offer moral support but clearly there for one reason, the outcome. He adjusted his cufflinks and whispered something into Sophie's ear that made her smirk faintly. Then the door opened again, and Maya stepped inside. The energy in the room changed instantly. Sophie's head snapped around, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of the young woman in a modest dress, clutching a small purse nervously. "Who is she?" Sophie demanded. Carla looked up calmly. "Miss Rivera has been asked to attend as a named party in your mother's will." Sophie blinked. "Named party? What are you talking about? I've never even seen her before." Maya's voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "Mrs. Thompson was my friend." Sophie laughed coldly. "My mother didn't have friends like you." Derek placed a hand on her knee, whispering, "Relax, babe. It's probably nothing." But I could feel Sophie's pulse quicken. Even in death, I knew her that well. Carla cleared her throat and opened the large envelope that held my final will and testament. Her tone became formal, professional, the way one sounds when handling delicate truth. "Per the wishes of the late Lila Thompson, I will now read her final statement," she began. The room fell silent, except for the soft rustle of paper. "To my daughter, Sophie, my only child, I leave not bitterness but a lesson. You were my greatest love and my deepest heartbreak. In life, I gave you everything I had, but love cannot be measured in wealth. It can only be reflected in actions." Sophie shifted in her chair, frowning. "It is my hope that in losing what you expected, you will find what you've lost in yourself." She sat up straighter. "What is that supposed to mean?" she snapped. Carla continued reading, unbothered. 80% of my estate, including all real estate holdings, liquid assets and investments, is to be transferred to Miss Maya Rivera and her brother, Noah Rivera. The remaining 20% shall be placed in a charitable trust under Sophie's name, released only upon completion of 5 years of verified community service and charitable work. The sound that followed was pure silence, heavy, stunned, suffocating. Sophie's mouth fell open. Derek blinked as if he'd misheard. Maya's hands flew to her face, her eyes wide in disbelief. That's impossible," Sophie said, her voice rising. "You must be mistaken." Carla looked up. "It's all here in writing, properly witnessed and notarized. Your mother was of sound mind when she signed these documents." "No," Sophie snapped, standing up. "She didn't even know this woman. There's no way she'd give her everything." Maya's voice cracked. "I didn't ask for anything. I swear. I didn't even know." Sophie pointed at her, trembling with fury. "You must have manipulated her." "Did you know she was dying? Did you plan this?" Carla interjected, her tone sharp but calm. "Miss Thompson, I can assure you your mother's decision was her own." She explained her reasons in detail. Derek leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "So the caretaker gets rich while the daughter gets what? Homework?" Carla's eyes flashed with disapproval. "Maya Rivera was not a caretaker. She was your mother's friend. And your mother made her choices based on gratitude, not obligation." Sophie turned back toward Maya, her face twisting. "You stole my inheritance!" Maya's voice trembled. "I didn't steal anything. She helped me when I had nothing. She changed my life." "She changed your life?" Sophie spat. "She ruined mine." Her voice broke at the end. And for the first time, she looked less like the elegant, composed woman she pretended to be and more like a frightened child who'd just lost control of everything she thought she owned. Carla waited for the tension to quiet before continuing. "Your mother also left you a sealed letter, Sophie. She requested that you receive it only after the will was read." She reached into the folder and handed Sophie a white envelope. My handwriting covered the front, "For Sophie from Mom." Sophie stared at it, hands shaking, as if touching it might burn her. Meanwhile, Maya was crying silently, clutching the edge of her chair, whispering over and over, "She can't have meant this. She can't have meant me." Carla spoke softly. "Miss Rivera, your mother's will also includes provisions for you and your brother's medical and educational expenses, along with ongoing support through the foundation she established in her name. You'll be contacted with the details." Maya shook her head, overwhelmed. I don't deserve this. You do, Carla said gently. That's why she chose you. Sophie slammed the envelope onto the table. This is insane. I'm contesting this. I don't care what it takes. I'm not letting some stranger take what's mine. Carla's patience wavered for the first time. It's not yours, Sophie. It was your mother's. And now it belongs to whom she chose. Derek stood, pulling Sophie up with him. We're leaving. Come on, babe. We'll fight this. You'll get everything back. Sophie hesitated, glaring at Maya one last time, a glare full of hatred, disbelief, and something else she didn't yet recognize. Shame. When they stormed out, Maya stayed behind, her tears falling freely. She really left it to me? Carla nodded. She trusted you to do what's right, Maya whispered. I don't even know what to do. Carla smiled softly. Then start by saying thank you not to me but to her. She's still listening. And I was. From wherever I was, beyond pain, beyond time, I watched the moment unfold. Sophie's fury, Maya's heartbreak, Carla's quiet strength. It was everything I had foreseen and feared. But in that chaos, I also saw something small, a crack forming in Sophie's armor. Beneath the anger and greed, there was confusion, hurt, maybe even guilt. The seeds had been planted. She didn't know it yet, but the letter she held would begin the journey she'd avoided all her life. As Carla locked the documents away and Maya left the office trembling, I whispered to the fading light of that room. Forgiveness starts where entitlement ends. But Sophie wasn't done, not by a long shot. Grief can twist into something darker when entitlement takes over. If I thought the storm had passed after the will was read, I was wrong. From where I drifted somewhere between memory and eternity, I could see that what followed wasn't grief, it was fury. Sophie's fury. The moment she stormed out of Carla's office, she was already spiraling. Derek trailed behind her, trying to calm her down, but she was inconsolable. She betrayed me, Sophie shouted as they reached the parking lot. My own mother. Can you believe this? Derek leaned against the car, lighting a cigarette. You'll contest it, right? There's gotta be a loophole. Maybe she wasn't in her right mind. She was dying, Derek, Sophie snapped. They'll just say she was emotional. Then make them see she was manipulated, he said, exhaling smoke. That girl Maya or whatever, she probably tricked her. Sophie's hands trembled as she clenched her phone. She's not getting away with this. Not with my inheritance. That word again, the one that had built walls between us long before death did. I watched her in the days that followed, consumed by anger. She didn't cry. She didn't mourn. Instead, she strategized. She called every lawyer she knew, trying to find one who would take her case. Most turned her down. The will was airtight, Carla had seen to that. When no lawyer could help, Sophie turned to something darker. Obsession. She began researching Maya, scouring social media, public records, anything she could find. She learned about her job at the nursing home, about her sick brother, about the modest apartment she rented on the east side of town. She's nothing, Sophie muttered one night, pacing her living room. She's a charity case. There's no way Mom would just hand everything to her unless she did something. Derek, half listening, shrugged. Then find out what? Everyone's got skeletons. But Sophie didn't want the truth, she wanted validation. She wanted someone to tell her that she'd been wronged. Meanwhile, Maya was living in quiet shock. She couldn't process what had happened. The money, the properties, the foundation, it all felt too heavy, too undeserved. She'd gone to Carla's office the next day, begging her to reverse it. I can't accept this, she pleaded. Please, there has to be a way to give it back. Carla shook her head gently. Lila made her wishes very clear. You can use it to help others, if that makes it easier to accept, but she wanted you to have it. Maya left in tears, clutching her brother's hand as if the ground beneath her wasn't real. While Maya struggled with gratitude and guilt, Sophie was sinking deeper into resentment. She stopped going to work. She stopped answering friends' messages. She spent hours replaying that day in her mind the moment she heard Maya's name. She stole my mother's love, Sophie told Derek. That's what she did. She made her choose between us. Derek didn't correct her. He just poured himself another drink and muttered, "Then make her pay." And so Sophie began following Maya. At first, it was just curiosity. She'd park outside the hospital where Maya worked, watching her through the car window, trying to understand what my connection to this young woman had been. She saw her pushing patients in wheelchairs, laughing softly with elderly residents, carrying groceries for a woman twice her age. The longer she watched, the more confused she became. Maya didn't look like someone who manipulated anyone. She looked genuine. But instead of softening Sophie, that realization only made her angrier. Because if Maya truly was kind, then what did that make Sophie? One evening, Sophie drove to Maya's building and waited. When Maya came out carrying a bag of groceries, Sophie followed her on foot, keeping to the shadows. Maya had no idea she was being watched. She stopped at a pharmacy, then at a food stand where she bought soup and gave it to a homeless man. Sophie watched in disbelief. "She's playing some saint now?" she muttered bitterly. "Of course she is, probably all for show." But deep down, something unsettled her. That night, she came home to Derek, waiting with a bottle of champagne. "Don't tell me you're celebrating," she snapped. He grinned. "Why not? You'll get the money eventually. People like her don't last long with that kind of cash. She'll screw up, and when she does, the courts will eat her alive." Sophie didn't answer. She just stared out the window, lost in thought. Somewhere, in the back of her mind, my letter still waited unopened. She couldn't bring herself to read it yet. She told herself it didn't matter, that I'd said enough by giving everything away. But the truth was, she was afraid. Afraid of what she might find inside, not hatred, but honesty. And honesty was the one thing she'd avoided all her life. Meanwhile, Maya tried to disappear. She avoided reporters, ignored messages, and kept her world small. She donated part of what she received to the hospital and spent most of her days caring for Noah. Every time she looked at my photograph on her shelf, she whispered the same thing. "I'll make you proud, Lila." If only Sophie had heard those words, maybe she would have understood Maya wasn't her enemy. She was her mirror, showing her everything she could have been. But rage doesn't listen to reason. A week after the will reading, Sophie showed up at Carla's office unannounced. Her hair was a mess, her eyes swollen from lack of sleep. "I want to see the original documents," she demanded. "I want proof she signed them." Carla stayed calm. "We've been through this. Everything is legitimate." "Then why her?" Sophie's voice cracked. "Why that girl? My mother didn't even know her." Carla's expression softened. "Because your mother saw something in her she wished she could still see in you." Those words hit Sophie like a slap. For a long moment, she just stood there, breathing heavily, before turning and walking out. That night, she drove aimlessly through the city, ending up outside the hospital again. She parked and sat there, staring at the glowing windows. In one of them, she saw Maya's silhouette helping a patient into bed. The kindness in that gesture, the quiet patience, made Sophie's chest tighten with something she didn't recognize anymore. Regret. But it was fleeting. Rage returned like an old habit. "She doesn't deserve it," she whispered to herself. "She doesn't deserve her." And as she drove away, I watched from the stillness of whatever comes after life, helpless, aching, but strangely hopeful. Because even in her rage, Sophie had started asking the right question: why her? That question was the crack in her anger, and through that crack, truth would one day find its way in. For now, though, she was still burning, still lost. And Maya, kind, gentle Maya, had no idea the storm that was gathering just beyond her quiet little world. She had no idea what she was about to uncover. The deeper she dug, the uglier her reflection became. If I still existed in some way, a breath in the wind, a whisper in the quiet, then I was there the night Sophie crossed the line between grief and madness. It started with a folder. A plain manila folder on her kitchen table, filled with printed pages, social media screenshots, property records, hospital invoices, every trace she could find of Maya Rivera. She had become obsessed, her anger sharpening into something surgical. She hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair unbrushed. The apartment was a mess of coffee cups, crumpled notes, and legal documents she'd highlighted and underlined until the paper tore. She told herself she was just looking for proof, something to justify what she already believed. That Maya had taken advantage of a dying woman. That I'd been manipulated. That she, Sophie, was the victim. But underneath that rationalization, there was fear. Fear that I had simply chosen someone better than her. She called Derek constantly, ranting, crying, demanding that he help her dig deeper. But Derek had grown tired of her breakdowns. He'd stopped pretending to care. "Sophie," he said one night, half drunk on the couch. "Maybe your mom just didn't like who you became." Sophie froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" He shrugged, taking a sip of whiskey. "You know exactly what it means." They fought. Yelling, shattering glass, tears. When he stormed out, she threw her phone against the wall. The screen cracked like her world. That was when she made her next move. She hired a private investigator. The man's name was Mark Ellis, a retired detective who didn't ask many questions. Money was all he needed. She met him in a dimly lit cafe and slid a thick envelope across the table. "I want everything you can find on a woman named Maya Rivera," she said. "Where she works, where she lives, who she's connected to, every secret she's hiding." He raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this? It's not exactly cheap." "Just do it," she snapped. "She stole my mother's fortune. I want to know how." Mark nodded slowly, pocketing the cash. "I'll be in touch." Weeks passed. Sophie's life became a cycle of waiting for calls, for answers, for something that would make her feel vindicated. But when the report finally came, it wasn't what she expected. Mark slid a thin folder across his desk. "Not much to tell," he said. "Girl's clean. Too clean." Sophie frowned, flipping through the pages. Maya Rivera, 27 years old. No criminal record. No debts. No lawsuits. She'd worked 2 jobs for years, one at a nursing home, another cleaning offices. Everything she earned went toward medical bills for her brother, Noah, who had been born with a heart defect. Her parents had died in a car crash 5 years earlier. She'd been his guardian ever since. Sophie kept reading, her hands trembling. There were no scandals, no manipulation, just tragedy and perseverance. "This can't be it," she whispered. "There has to be more." Mark shook his head. "Sometimes good people are just good people. Maybe your mom saw something in her that—" "Stop," Sophie said sharply, closing the folder. "You don't know anything about my mother." But she did. Everyone did. Everyone who'd met me in those final months knew what Sophie refused to accept, that I'd grown tired of being loved only for what I could give. That night, Sophie sat alone in the dark, the folder open in front of her. She looked at the photos of Maya smiling beside her brother, volunteering at the hospital, helping elderly patients into their chairs. Every image felt like a knife twisting deeper into her pride. If Maya was truly good, then Sophie was the villain. And that was a truth she couldn't bear. In her desperation, Sophie did something reckless. She broke into Carla's office. It was a quiet Sunday night. She used the spare key she'd kept from a previous appointment, sneaking through the dimly lit hallway until she reached the office door. Inside, the smell of paper and coffee lingered. She opened drawers, rifled through folders, searching for anything that could prove Carla and Maya had conspired. And then she found it, a small flash drive, labeled Lila personal recordings. For a moment, her heart stopped. She plugged it into Carla's computer, her hands shaking, and clicked on the first audio file. My voice filled the room. "If you're listening to this, it means I'm gone. I wanted to leave behind not instructions but memories, pieces of myself that explain why I made the choices I did." Sophie froze. It had been so long since she'd heard my voice like that. Warm, gentle, unguarded. I spoke about my illness, my fears, the loneliness that had crept in as my health faded. I spoke about how I met Maya, how her kindness reminded me of the woman I used to be. I said her laughter had healed something in me that Sophie's absence had broken. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she kept listening. I know Sophie won't understand this right away, but I hope one day she realizes that love is not something you inherit. It's something you nurture. And I can't take my wealth with me, but I can choose where it will grow roots. Maya showed me what love looks like when it asks for nothing in return. That's what I wanted Sophie to see. Sophie covered her mouth, sobbing silently. If she ever listens to this, I hope she knows I never stopped loving her. I just stopped feeding her greed. Maybe, by losing what she expected, she'll find what she's lost in herself. By the time the recording ended, Sophie was shaking. Her makeup streaked down her cheeks, her breath shallow and uneven. She whispered into the silence. "Why, Mom? Why not just tell me?" But I had told her in every unanswered call, every quiet disappointment, every time she chose money over moments. Sophie stayed there for a long time, surrounded by files and darkness, until dawn crept through the blinds. When she finally left the office, she didn't take the flash drive. She didn't need to. My words had burned themselves into her. For the first time, her anger began to fracture into guilt. Real, aching guilt. She drove aimlessly through the city that morning, my voice echoing in her mind. She passed the hospital, the streets where Maya walked, and the house she'd grown up in. Everything looked different now, smaller, emptier. When she pulled up in front of her apartment, Derek was waiting. He saw her face and frowned. "What happened?" She shook her head. "Nothing." But inside, something had shifted. Something irreversible. She went to her bedroom, shut the door, and finally opened the envelope she'd refused to read until now, the one I'd left for her. She unfolded the letter slowly, tears already blurring the words. "My sweet Sophie, you will be angry when you read this. Maybe you already are. But one day, you'll see that I didn't take anything from you. I gave you a chance to become the woman I once believed you'd be. This is not punishment. It's an invitation." Sophie pressed the paper to her chest and sobbed until she couldn't breathe. Outside her window, the city buzzed with life. But for the first time in years, Sophie felt small, not powerful, not entitled, not envied, just human. And somewhere, beyond the reach of life and time, I whispered to her through the quiet, "You were never meant to inherit my wealth, Sophie. You were meant to inherit my heart." But redemption always demands a price. Two women, both broken in their own ways, finally collided. If my spirit could still feel the pulse of the living, I would have felt it that morning, the tremor in Sophie's chest as she stood outside the hospital where Maya worked. She hadn't planned the visit, not really. It was one of those moments when impulse overrides reason, when guilt becomes heavier than fear. After reading my letter and hearing my voice from the recordings, Sophie had spent days in silence. Derek had left, the apartment had grown colder, and she hadn't spoken to anyone. But one thought haunted her. Why did Maya mean so much to my mother? So here she was outside street. Claire's hospital, her palms sweaty, her heart pounding so hard it almost drowned out the city noise around her. Through the glass doors, she could see Maya pushing a wheelchair down the hall. She was smiling at an elderly woman, listening attentively, her posture calm, gentle, unassuming. Sophie hesitated before walking inside. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and the scent of antiseptic filled the air. Her heels clicked on the floor as she made her way toward the reception desk. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low. "I'm looking for Maya Rivera." The nurse smiled kindly. "She's in Ward C, helping with the morning rounds. You can wait by the garden if you like, she takes her break there." Sophie nodded and walked toward the hospital garden, a small courtyard with benches and potted plants. She sat under a tree and waited, tapping her fingers nervously against her knee. It didn't take long. Maya appeared a few minutes later, carrying a cup of coffee and a clipboard. When she spotted Sophie sitting there, she froze. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, Maya slowly approached. Her voice quiet but steady. Sophie? Sophie stood, her throat tight. You know who I am. Maya nodded. Of course I do. There was a long, heavy silence. Sophie finally spoke, her words coming out sharper than she intended. You took everything. Maya's eyes widened. I didn't take anything. She gave it to me. Sophie's jaw clenched. Don't say it like that. You make it sound so casual. Like she just handed over her whole life to a stranger. Maya looked down. I never asked for it. Then why didn't you refuse? I tried. Sophie scoffed. Really? You tried? Because from where I'm standing, you got the house, the money, the business. I didn't take the business. Maya interrupted softly. I told Carla I didn't want to run it. She set up a foundation instead, one in your mother's name. It helps single mothers and caretakers. That's where most of the funds go. Sophie blinked, taken aback. A foundation? Maya nodded. Your mother wanted her legacy to help people like her, people who had to fight alone. The words struck Sophie like a blow. She turned away, hiding the tremor in her voice. She was supposed to leave that to me. She did, Maya said gently. You just didn't see it. Sophie's breath caught. What do you mean? Maya stepped closer. She left you something no one else could take, her love, her forgiveness, her chance to change. She told me once that she hoped you'd find your heart again. I think that's what she really wanted to give you. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with grief, anger, and something new, truth. Sophie's voice broke. You talk like you knew her better than I did. Maya hesitated. Maybe I didn't know her longer, but I knew her honestly. She didn't have to pretend around me. Sophie looked up sharply. Are you saying she had to pretend around me? Maya's eyes filled with tears. I'm saying she loved you even when it hurt her. She wanted you near, but you only came when she could give you something. She told me once that she missed the little girl who used to draw pictures for her on the fridge. That broke something inside Sophie. Her composure cracked, and she whispered, I don't even remember the last time I hugged her. Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. She gave me this, she said. Told me to give it to you when I thought you were ready. Sophie stared at it, hesitant. What is it? A letter, Maya said softly. Her last one. Sophie's fingers trembled as she took it. Her name, Sophie, was written in my handwriting. The loops delicate but familiar. She wanted to read it right there, but Maya said, Maybe you should read it somewhere quiet. Sophie nodded. Wait, she said as Maya began to turn away. Why you, though? Why did she care about you so much? Maya paused. Because she said I reminded her of herself, the part of her that used to care without expecting anything back. Sophie swallowed hard. And me? Maya looked at her with a tenderness that didn't belong in a conversation like this. You reminded her of who she once was, before the world broke her. Sophie's eyes filled with tears again. She hated me at the end, didn't she? Maya shook her head. No, she never stopped loving you. She just stopped waiting for you to love her back. That sentence hung in the air like a prayer neither of them could finish. Sophie sank onto the bench, clutching the envelope. For the first time in her adult life, she didn't feel entitled or powerful, she just felt small. Maya sat beside her. They didn't speak for a long time. The sound of birds filled the silence, mingling with the distant hum of hospital machines. After a while, Sophie whispered, I hated you, you know. Maya smiled faintly. I know. I thought you were some manipulative gold digger who took advantage of her. I don't blame you, Maya said softly. If I were in your shoes, I might have thought the same thing. Sophie looked at her, then really looked at her and saw something she hadn't expected. Empathy. There was no anger in Maya's face, no triumph, no resentment, just sadness and understanding. Why are you being kind to me? Sophie asked. Because she would have wanted me to be. That was the moment Sophie broke. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed deep, shaking sobs that came from years of pride, guilt, and denial. Maya placed a hand on her shoulder but said nothing. She just stayed there. When Sophie finally spoke again, her voice was hoarse. What do I do now? Maya thought for a moment. You start small. You do one good thing, then another, and you keep doing them until it stops feeling like punishment. Sophie nodded weakly. I don't deserve forgiveness. Maya looked up at the sky. Neither did I, but she forgave both of us anyway. They sat together until the sun began to set, casting warm light across the courtyard. For a brief moment, the world felt softer, quieter, as if I were still there, watching over them both. When they finally stood to leave, Sophie turned to Maya and whispered, "Thank you." Maya smiled. "You're welcome." As they walked in opposite directions, Sophie held the envelope tightly against her chest. She didn't know it yet, but inside that letter was the final key not to her inheritance, but to her redemption. And that's when she decided to do something I never expected. Sometimes, losing everything is how you find yourself. If I could still feel pride, it would have been the kind that brings both pain and peace, because what came after that meeting changed Sophie forever. For the first time since my death, my daughter made a choice that wasn't driven by money, image, or ego. She chose humility. She chose to start over. It didn't happen instantly. Change rarely does. But it began with a single decision the moment she tore up the legal papers she'd prepared to contest the will. She sat alone in her apartment that night, the soft hum of the city outside her window. The envelope Maya had given her, my final letter, lay open on the table. She had read it 3 times already, and each time, the words hit differently. You were my greatest joy, Sophie, and my deepest sorrow. But I believe that even broken hearts can heal if they remember where they came from. Those lines echoed in her head as she stared at the lawsuit she'd drafted with Derek's help. Contesting the will had become her obsession, her last link to control. But after meeting Maya, after reading my words, she realized the battle she'd been fighting wasn't about inheritance. It was about pride. And pride was what had destroyed everything between us. So she picked up the papers, ripped them into pieces, and threw them in the trash. The sound of tearing paper felt like release. When Derek came over later that evening, expecting an update, she met him at the door. It's over, she said. He frowned. What are you talking about? I'm not contesting the will. He blinked, then laughed incredulously. You can't be serious. That girl walked away with millions, Sophie. Your millions. They were never mine, she said quietly. Derek's expression hardened. You're really going to let her win? After everything you've worked for? I didn't work for any of it, she replied. Mom did. And I ruined what little love I had left with her because I couldn't see past myself. He stared at her, stunned. Then his voice turned sharp. You've lost it. You think walking away makes you noble? It just makes you pathetic. Sophie smiled sadly. Then I guess I'd rather be pathetic than heartless. And for the first time, she meant it. When she closed the door on Derek that night, she didn't just end a relationship, she ended a version of herself. The one who measured worth by what she owned. The one who thought affection could be bought. The next morning, Sophie packed a small bag and went for a walk through the city. She didn't know where she was going, but her feet carried her towards Street Claire's hospital, the place where Maya worked, the place where I had met her. She found Maya in the cafeteria, sitting with her brother, Noah, who looked healthier now, his cheeks full of color. They were laughing about something, a sound that once would have made Sophie envious. But now it made her smile. When Maya noticed her, she waved her over. Hey, stranger. Sophie hesitated. I didn't want to intrude. You're not intruding, Maya said warmly. We were just talking about starting a little project, a community drive for caretakers. You should join us. Me? Sophie laughed softly. I wouldn't even know where to start. Maya shrugged. Then that's the perfect place to start. And so she did. At first, Sophie helped with simple tasks, answering calls, sorting donations, organizing schedules. It was mundane work, but for the first time, she didn't care about titles or recognition. She cared about the people. She spent her days surrounded by stories of resilience, single mothers juggling jobs, families caring for sick relatives, Young people fighting illnesses with courage she'd never known. Each one humbled her. Each one chipped away at what was left of her arrogance. Slowly, Sophie began to change. She sold her expensive apartment and moved into a smaller, simpler place. She donated half her wardrobe to the shelter Maya volunteered at. She even cut her hair short, saying she wanted to feel lighter. People noticed. Carla noticed most of all. One afternoon, Sophie stopped by Carla's office not to demand answers this time, but to thank her. "I know I wasn't kind to you," she said softly. "Or to anyone, really. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." Carla smiled, surprised but moved. "Your mother would be proud, Sophie." Sophie shook her head. "Not yet, but maybe someday." Carla studied her for a moment before saying, "You know, the foundation could use someone with your background. You understand real estate, finance, management, and now, maybe, a little bit of heart." Sophie laughed. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance," Carla replied. And that was how Sophie began working for the Lila Thompson Foundation, the very organization she'd once resented. She threw herself into it completely, organizing charity events, visiting hospitals, and personally overseeing projects that provided housing for struggling families. The work was exhausting, but it gave her something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. Every time she walked into a hospital ward, she remembered me sitting there, pale and tired, trying to reach her through phone calls she never answered. That memory hurt, but it also guided her. She started volunteering at the hospice where I'd spent my final months. The nurses remembered me well. One of them, an older woman named Patricia, hugged Sophie when she introduced herself. "You look just like her," Patricia said, eyes glistening. "She talked about you all the time. She loved you so much." Sophie had to step away to hide her tears. She spent weeks there, organizing supplies, comforting patients, even reading to them when they had no one else. For the first time, she understood what I'd meant when I said kindness was wealth too. Maya and Sophie grew closer through all of this. What began as guilt turned into friendship, a quiet, steady bond built on shared purpose. Maya never treated her like a rival or a burden. She treated her like family. One evening, after a long day at the foundation, they sat together on the office steps watching the city lights. "You've changed," Maya said with a gentle smile. Sophie chuckled. "I'm just trying to fix what I broke." "You can't fix the past," Maya said. "But you can honor it." Sophie nodded, looking up at the stars. "I think that's what I'm doing." And she was. Every life she touched, every act of compassion, was another quiet apology to me, herself, to the world she'd once ignored. If I could have spoken to her then, I would have told her that forgiveness doesn't erase pain, it transforms it, and she was finally learning that lesson. By the end of that year, Sophie had become the face of the foundation. Not because of her name, but because of her work. People admired her dedication, her humility, her willingness to admit she'd been wrong. The newspapers that once wrote about the heiress who lost everything now wrote about the daughter who rebuilt her mother's legacy. But Sophie didn't care about headlines anymore. Her satisfaction came quietly from every life she helped change, from every story she heard that reminded her of mine. And one night, as she locked up the foundation's office, she whispered into the empty air, "I get it now, Mom. I finally get it." If I'd still been there, I would have smiled through tears. Because in that moment, I knew the woman my daughter had become was exactly the one I'd been hoping for all along. But my story still had one final surprise left. From beyond the grave, my voice reached her one last time. It had been nearly a year since my funeral when Carla called Sophie to her office again. By then, Sophie had become someone entirely new, calmer, humbler, softer. Her life no longer revolved around power or possessions. It revolved around purpose. She was helping Maya expand the Lila Thompson Foundation, overseeing new housing projects for struggling families and caregivers. Her once empty days were now filled with meaning. Yet, despite all her progress, there was one thing she still carried quietly: guilt. She had forgiven me, but she hadn't forgiven herself. So when Carla's call came, Sophie assumed it was about foundation paperwork. But when she arrived, she found something unexpected waiting for her on the desk. A small black USB drive labeled in my handwriting for Sophie final words. Carla smiled softly. Your mother asked me to give this to you when I thought you were ready. Sophie stared at it, her throat tightening. How did you know I was ready now? Carla gave her a knowing look. Because you stopped asking why she did it, and started asking how you can honor it. That was her sign. For a long moment, Sophie just stood there, holding the flash drive in her hand like it was made of glass. Then, with trembling fingers, she plugged it into Carla's computer. The screen flickered, and then there I was, sitting in my favorite armchair wrapped in a shawl, my face thin but peaceful. The background was my old living room, sunlight spilling through the curtains. I smiled faintly before I spoke. Hello, my beautiful girl. Sophie gasped softly at the sound of my voice. She reached toward the screen as if she could touch me. If you're watching this, I continued, then I'm already gone. And that's all right, don't be sad. Death isn't an ending, sweetheart. It's just a quiet doorway to somewhere softer. Sophie covered her mouth, tears already welling in her eyes. I know you're angry. Or maybe by now, you're just confused. You've probably said my name 1,000 times, trying to understand why I did what I did, and I can't answer that with logic, only with love. I paused in the video, my eyes tired but kind. I didn't leave you out of my will to punish you, Sophie. I did it to wake you up. To remind you that love, real love, isn't something that waits in a bank account. It's something you build, give, and earn every day, Sophie sobbed quietly. Oh, Mom. Do you remember, I said in the video, when you were 8 years old and you wanted to start a lemonade stand? You spilled half the sugar on the floor and I almost slipped. But you stood there with that proud little grin, shouting to every neighbor who passed by. You made $3 that day and you gave every penny to a stray cat shelter down the street. You said, they need it more than me. A shaky laugh escaped Sophie's lips. She remembered that day vividly, the yellow stand, the paper cups, the way I'd hugged her afterward and said I'd never been prouder. That's the girl I remembered when I made my will, I said softly. The one who gave even when she had little. Somewhere along the way, you lost her. And I couldn't let you go without trying to help you find her again. Sophie was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking. Carla quietly left the room to give her privacy. I know what the world taught you, my darling, I continued in the recording. That success means more than compassion. That people will respect you for your wealth, not your warmth. But that's a lie. I chased it once too. And I lost parts of myself in the process. When I met Maya, I saw what I had forgotten, and I remembered who I wanted to be. I smiled faintly. I wish you could have seen how much you two had in common. You both loved deeply, you just showed it differently. Maya loved through giving. You loved through wanting to protect. Somewhere along the way, that love got twisted into possession. But love isn't possession, Sophie. It's permission to grow, to fail, to change. Sophie reached out and touched the screen, whispering, I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't understand. The recording continued. You don't have to be sorry. I forgave you long before I left. I just hoped one day you'd forgive yourself. Because the truth is, you were always enough even when you thought you weren't. Even when you hurt me. I took a slow breath in the video, as though the words themselves were lifting a weight from my chest. You were my little girl, my miracle. And even when I was disappointed, I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. Sophie cried harder, her hands clutching her chest as if she could hold my words against her heart. By now, I said gently, you've probably met Maya. Maybe you hate her less now. Maybe you even understand why I chose her. She didn't replace you, sweetheart. She helped me remember how to love again. She reminded me of you before life made you hard. So please, don't see her as the thief of your inheritance. See her as the keeper of my last piece of faith. I smiled, a tear glistening in my tired eyes. I asked Maya to give you something, a pendant. Inside, there's a photograph of us from when you were little. That's how I want you to remember me, not sick, not distant. Just your mom laughing with her messy-haired little girl. Sophie reached into her purse, pulling out the small velvet box Maya had given her weeks earlier. Inside was the gold pendant, its surface slightly worn from time. She opened it and there we were. I was holding her as a child, both of us smiling with our eyes closed. On the back of the pendant were 4 engraved words, "You are still loved." The video was almost over. My voice grew softer, slower. If there's one thing I want you to remember, Sophie, it's this. Money fades, but love doesn't. Give freely. Live gently. And never forget that your heart, not your inheritance, is what connects you to me. I paused, and for a brief second, my gaze seemed to meet hers through the screen. I'm proud of you, sweetheart, even now, especially now. The screen went black. Sophie sat there for a long time. The pendant clutched in her hand, tears streaming silently down her face. For the first time, the ache in her chest didn't feel like punishment. It felt like forgiveness. She whispered into the empty room, her voice trembling. I love you, Mom. And if souls can hear what hearts can't say aloud, then I heard her. I watched as she stood, wiped her tears, and walked to the window. The sun had broken through the clouds outside, filling the world with light. She pressed the pendant to her heart and smiled faintly. I promise I'll make you proud. And she would. Because that video, my final gift, wasn't just closure, it was a rebirth. It was the sound of my love echoing through her, reminding her that even in death, I hadn't left. I had simply become the quiet voice that would guide her every time she forgot who she was. And for the first time, my daughter truly cried for me. A year after my funeral, my daughter became the woman I always hoped she'd be. Time moves differently where I am now. Down there, a year has passed, seasons have shifted, lives have gone on, but here, every memory feels suspended in golden light. I can still see Sophie, Maya, and the quiet ripples my choices created. If love could reach across time, I would tell you what that year looked like, how grief slowly turned into purpose. After watching the video, I left her. Sophie didn't return to her old life. She didn't crave parties, business deals, or luxury anymore. She kept her promise not to chase what was gone, but to build something new from what remained. The Lila Thompson Foundation had grown under her hands. What began as a modest charity had become a movement, an organization dedicated to single mothers, caretakers, and families who had nowhere else to turn. Every project carried my name, but its heart belonged to her. She ran it not as the heiress people once mocked, but as a leader who knew what pain felt like. I watched her walking through crowded halls, greeting volunteers, shaking hands with donors, laughing with children. She spoke gently, but with conviction, the kind of quiet strength that can move mountains. When reporters asked why she worked so hard, she smiled and said, "Because my mother taught me that love is an action, not a word." Every time she said that, I felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Maya was always by her side. The two of them had become inseparable, partners in work, sisters in spirit. Where Sophie had once seen a rival, she now saw family. They balanced each other perfectly. Sophie handled logistics, funding, and outreach. Maya handled the heart, the people, the stories, the humanity that kept their mission alive. Together, they were unstoppable. One of their biggest accomplishments that year was the opening of the Haven Home, a large house on the outskirts of the city. It used to be my old estate, the same house where Sophie grew up, where we'd fought, cried, and shared some of our happiest memories. Now, it had become a shelter for single mothers and their children. I watched as Sophie stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, her voice steady as she spoke to the crowd. "This house once belonged to my family," she said. "Now it belongs to anyone who needs one." She smiled through tears as she cut the ribbon, the crowd cheering around her. Maya was beside her, clapping, her hand resting gently on Sophie's shoulder. If ghosts could cry, I would have wept then, not from sorrow, but from gratitude. Inside the house, the rooms had been transformed. The dining room became a community kitchen. My old office was now a playroom filled with toys and books. Even my bedroom had changed. The same window where I used to watch sunsets now overlooked rows of garden beds tended by mothers and children planting flowers together. The house that once held my loneliness now held laughter. Sometimes, I saw Sophie sitting in that garden at dusk, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She'd hold the gold pendant, the one I left her, and whisper softly, "I hope you're seeing this, Mom." I was. She'd become everything I wanted her to be, not perfect but real. The kind of woman who found meaning in service, not status. Her transformation even began to inspire others. Articles were written about her journey, the daughter who turned loss into legacy, from heiress to humanitarian. But Sophie never chased recognition. Every time a reporter tried to focus on her redemption story, she redirected the spotlight to the women and children they were helping. "This isn't about me," she'd say. "It's about every mother who ever felt invisible." There was one evening I remember vividly, the first anniversary of my passing. Sophie and Maya held a small memorial in the foundation's courtyard. It wasn't grand or formal, it was intimate. A few close friends, staff members, and families we'd helped gathered around a circle of candles. Sophie stood before them, holding a framed photograph of me, one taken years before the sickness, when I was strong and smiling. "My mother believed that kindness is wealth," she said softly. And she was right. Everything you see here, this foundation, these lives we've touched, came from her heart, not her money. I lost her. But through this work, I feel her everywhere. Then she lit a single candle and placed it beside the photo. "This is for her," she said, her voice trembling, "and for anyone who's ever had to learn love the hard way." Maya stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes, and placed her own candle beside mine. "Lila taught us all something," she said. "That love doesn't die, it just changes form." For a moment the courtyard was silent except for the flickering flames. And in that quiet, I felt them, all of them, thinking not of loss, but of gratitude. After the ceremony, Sophie stayed behind. Everyone else had left. She sat on a bench under the string lights, the pendant resting in her palm. "You were right," she whispered into the night. "All along. Money fades. But love doesn't." The breeze carried her words upward. And if the air could hold memories, it held that one tightly. Later that year, the foundation launched a scholarship program for young caregivers in Maya's brother Noah's name. Sophie spearheaded the initiative herself, saying it was time to plant seeds that would outlive all of us. Noah, now healthy and studying medicine, called her Aunt Sophie. The first time he said it, she laughed through tears. "I think your sister's rubbing off on me," she told him. Their lives had intertwined in ways none of us could have predicted. The girl I once called a stranger had become the daughter of my heart, and my actual daughter had become the woman I'd always known she could be. Sometimes, I imagine what it would be like if I could speak to them now just once more. I'd tell Maya how proud I am of her strength. I'd tell Sophie that forgiveness isn't a destination, it's something she has to keep choosing every day. And I'd tell them both that the love between them, born out of pain and misunderstanding, is the legacy I never planned but always hoped for. Because that's what legacy truly is, not the things we leave behind, but the hearts we touch and the lives we change. My name might be carved on the foundation's plaque, but the real monument is invisible. It's in the way Sophie smiles now, the way Maya holds her head high, the way laughter fills the home that once echoed with silence. That laughter is my afterlife. A year later, I finally understood something I never did in life. You can't take your love with you when you die, but if you give enough of it away, it never leaves the world. And as I watched them both walking side by side down the foundation hallway, sunlight pouring over them like a blessing, I whispered the only thing left to say: "I'm home." And though I was gone, my love still guided them both. If you're listening to my story, remember this: wealth fades, love doesn't. If the veil between worlds could ever lift for just one moment, and I could speak again, this is what I'd tell you. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as a mother who learned what matters only when time ran out. I'd start with Sophie, my beautiful, complicated girl. I'd tell her that every decision I made, even the painful ones, came from love. I would remind her that sometimes love doesn't look like softness. Sometimes it looks like letting go, standing firm, teaching lessons that only pain can make permanent. If I could speak again, I'd tell her how proud I am, not for what she's achieved, but for who she finally became. I see her now, walking through the halls of the foundation that bears my name. She's smiling a real smile, not the practiced one she once wore for cameras. Her hair is tucked behind her ears, her sleeves rolled up, ink smudges on her fingers from signing donation forms. She's tired, but fulfilled. She listens when people speak. She sees them. That's the woman I raised in my heart long before she was born. I'd tell her that forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a rhythm, a breathing in and out. She'll have days when guilt creeps back in, when she'll replay every cruel word she ever said to me. On those days, I'd whisper, "You've already been forgiven. Stop punishing yourself for lessons you've already learned." I'd tell her to keep laughing, that her laughter is the echo of everything I did right. And then I'd tell Maya what I never had the chance to say in life: thank you. Thank you for walking into my world when I was drowning in bitterness. Thank you for showing me that kindness still exists, even when the world forgets it. Thank you for being the mirror that reflected back the goodness I thought I'd lost. If I could speak, I'd tell Maya she gave me peace at the end, not through grand gestures, but through presence. The way she sat with me in silence when the pain got bad, the way she reminded me of sunlight and second chances. I'd tell her she was my daughter too, not by blood, but by choice, by compassion, by the invisible threads that tie souls together when life rearranges the family we thought we deserved. I'd tell both of them that they saved me, because when I died, I thought my story ended in regret. I thought I'd leave behind only pain. But watching them now, watching them build, forgive, and love has turned my ending into something beautiful. If I could speak again, I'd tell the world a few things too. I'd say, don't wait to love people until it's convenient. Don't measure success by what fits in a bank account. Don't confuse pride for strength, because pride will bury you faster than any illness. If you have a mother, call her. If you have a child, listen to them. If you've hurt someone you love, apologize before the silence grows too heavy to bridge. Life is shorter than we ever admit. One day you're chasing appointments and deadlines, and the next, you're counting heartbeats, realizing how many you've wasted on things that never mattered. I tell everyone that love is not grand speeches or perfect timing, it's ordinary, quiet, messy. It's sitting beside someone who's broken and saying, "I'm not leaving." That's what Maya did for me. That's what I wish Sophie had known how to do. But maybe she needed to lose me to learn it for herself. I'd tell Sophie one more story, one she's probably forgotten. When she was little, about 4, she used to bring me wildflowers from the yard. Half of them were weeds, but she'd grin like she'd found treasure. One day I told her, "You don't have to bring me flowers every day." She looked up and said, "But what if you forget I love you?" I didn't realize then that she was teaching me something. Love has to be shown, not assumed. You can't assume people know. You have to keep reminding them. If I could speak again, I'd tell her I never forgot, not for 1 second. I'd also tell her something she might not believe, that I'm not gone. Not really. She feels me in the warmth that hits her face when she steps outside after a long day. She hears me in the laughter she and Maya share when they're tired but happy. She sees me every time she chooses compassion over anger. That's me. That's how mothers stay. Sometimes, when Sophie stands in the garden outside the Haven home, the wind rustles through the leaves. She'll close her eyes, and for a moment, she swears she hears my voice whispering through the trees. She's right. I'm there. Every breeze, every light, every heartbeat that carries kindness, that's where I live now. If I could speak again, I'd tell her to keep planting seeds. The world needs more of them. Seeds of empathy, of courage, of second chances. The world already has enough monuments built on pride. It needs gardens built on love. I'd tell her that one day, she'll be the age I was when I passed, and maybe she'll look back and realize that forgiveness is the inheritance I left her. Not money, not property. Just forgiveness, the wealth that never runs dry. And I'd tell her something else, something I didn't understand in life. Death doesn't erase us, it transforms us. We become stories, memories, lessons. We become the voice someone hears when they're about to give up. We become love's echo, guiding them home. If I could speak again, I'd tell her I'm not watching to judge her anymore. I'm watching to cheer her on. Every time she helps someone, every time she comforts a crying child or holds a mother's hand, I'm there, smiling, whispering, "That's it. That's who you were meant to be." And when her time comes many, many years from now, I'll be waiting. Not with disappointment, not with questions, but with open arms. Because that's what love does. It waits, it forgives, it endures. If I could speak again, I'd tell you something too, whoever's listening to my story. Maybe you've lost someone. Maybe you've been someone like Sophie, or someone like me trying too hard, loving too little, realizing too late. I'd tell you this: it's not too late now. You can still change the ending. You can still love better, forgive sooner, live softer. That's the true inheritance we all leave behind, the choice to love, no matter how late in the story it comes. And if my story has reached you, if even one line of it lingers in your heart, then I've done what I came here to do. I'd whisper my last words softly, like a secret meant only for those who truly listen. Cherish the people, not the things. Forgive before you're asked. Love without keeping score. And when life ends, may your heart be the only thing you leave behind that still grows. The world would grow quiet then, and I'd fade into that stillness, content, peaceful, eternal. Because this time, my voice wouldn't disappear. It would live on through Sophie, through Maya, through every act of kindness that carries my name without needing to speak it. And that's how, even in death, I found a way to live forever.